What up, freaks? Welcome to TwackTalk.
Welcome to another episode of TwackTalk. This week, we're going to be discussing the big four of thrash. I'm D.
I'm Ryan. And let's talk about some thrash metal.
Yes, we this topic kind of sort of we were going to talk about it at one point. We were just trying to figure out a way to address it. So I guess probably like this episode will probably be more like broad brush strokes because we're probably a lot of bands are going to be mentioned. Probably discussing some of the impact that they've made, but we've also wanted to shine a little spotlight on one of the bands that will be mentioned, which is Megadeth. And I was wanting to get you guys' introductions to the band. Like, when was your first experience? Whoever wants to start.
No, we're not covering Megadeth today. No, we'll talk about Megadeth, but we're not covering Megadeth today. That's a whole different thing. No. What we really want to, and I'm telling you, we are going to end up talking about is really 80s and 90s thrash metal origin, because pretty much everything after 90s, like so many other styles of metal started up and the genre changed. And if you're talking about the big four, I mean, really those are your impact years, 80s and 90s. I mean, you can't.
Are you talking about the big four thrash?
Yeah.
Okay. Because there's also the founding four fathers, which is Sabbath, Priest, Maiden, and Motorhead.
Well, and then there's the big four of grunge and
yeah.
No. We're staying in the thrash zone.
Fours.
The four horsemen. Yeah, but then you get into the people who start talking about Testament in there, and they're like, "Oh, but Testament's the fifth," and it's like, no. We're at fours, man. Four horsemen. Like, come on, stay with the theme, you jerk. But
for our audience, the big four, obviously Metallica. I'm breaking out an old Metallica shirt here, which was supposed to be their album cover, but they had to do Kill 'Em All because the record label didn't like something that said "metal up your arse."
When you go British all of a sudden, like, do you think that's going to help with the MPAA rating on this episode? Is all of a sudden
not to bleep
arse instead of X? The other three, Anthrax,
Slayer, Megadeth.
Yeah, Slayer and Megadeth. I'm going to come out right now, and I not to say that I haven't listened to Slayer. Like, I was a latecomer to Slayer, but they were definitely, as far as sound and vibe and everything else, they are the last of the set out of the four that I would gravitate towards. Anthrax, you were talking about how like this was spawned by like Megadeth, and this discussion has been long in coming, because this actually goes back to us when we were piloting episodes, and one of my original ideas was how I believe Anthrax is overrated within the thrash metal scene. As far as musical talent, or not talent, musical, their impact musically versus their impact versus being a spokesperson. Because I think Ian Scott. Bon Scott. Scott Ian. God. Ian Anderson, I think, is the guy from Jethro Tull. Scott Ian was, I think, one of the greatest ambassadors for thrash metal. Because, I mean, you would watch any of the shows in the 80s, and him and I don't know who else. I don't know Anthrax's band members well enough, but him and one of the other band members were always on the ads. They were always talking to the press. They were always out there pushing for, hey, we're doing this concert. We're doing this action. And so I think Anthrax deserves to be in there, not because of necessarily how much they put out musically to add to the thrash metal scene, but instead how much of an ambassador they were for the thrash metal scene. Where I think you take Slayer, Megadeth, and Metallica, and they just flooded the airwaves with the music component of it. Now, I know I'm gonna get thrashed, no pun intended, on that opinion on Anthrax, and if I get nasty gram from Scott Ian, I apologize. I don't think you guys are overrated necessarily. I just think your impact was a little less musically, except for on the fact of the tour scene as well. Because hell, you see how many people with their skater decks did you see with Anthrax written on it? I mean, come on. That fits with Slayer and Megadeth out there as awesome names to have as you're tearing up a grind on a half pipe or something. Anyway, so that was my little rant. I wanted to bring that back to the original Anthrax component of it, but because this thing's been brewing.
Does the prosecution have anything further to add? For the
not at this time. The prosecution rests.
Very well. I'd like to call to the witness stand.
Mr. Pump.
So, talking about the big four, of course, Metallica, you go back to their early albums, it's going to be speed thrash metal. You go back to Megadeth, it's going to be speed thrash metal. You go back to Slayer, speed thrash metal. Anthrax dabbled in it a little bit, but yes, they were probably the first ones to deviate a little bit, going more for a bouncing riff that flows. They got that whole mosh thing going where when Scott Ian starts stomping around and playing, and it's almost this centrifugal force of music that's going on at the same time. Yes, it deviated from the others, but at the same time, it showed a little bit more depth to that whole genre of music. Keep in mind that Metallica and Anthrax were both taken under the wing of Ozzy Osbourne on tours as a validation of what they were doing for the times. Case in point, Belly of the Beast was actually written for Ozzy Osbourne, and he turned it down and said, "No, you guys keep this. I want you to keep that song on Persistence of Time." So Anthrax, where do we really go with it other than the fact that, yes, they were great ambassadors? I remember watching Married with Children specifically to see that episode that Anthrax was on, and one of the most famous episodes of Married with Children of all things. And it was a blossoming sound, and they followed that up, of course, with Attack of the Killer Bees, and them getting together with Chuck D and Flavor Flav, and that was a pretty big moment.
Okay, that one song, unfreaking believable.
Bring the noise.
Yeah. In the
they helped create a whole new subgenre.
They did.
Well, and I think we talked about this in one of the prior conversations, and I can't remember if it actually made it into one of the prior recordings or not, and is out there. But we had talked about the big four, and that in many ways they each yield like a different growth point in result. Like I would actually say Anthrax is like the punk side of thrash metal. I would say Slayer is the beginning of death metal. Megadeth, I would say, was kind of at the time was almost like a glam thrash metal, somewhere between the hair bands and primarily I think that mostly due to Mustaine's voice, that it echoed more things like Axl Rose and Poison and stuff like that than it did, what we would expect elsewise. Metallica, I forget where we pinned them off at. We had a destination for them, but we had commented about that as far as like what brings you into the sphere with the thrash metal and which ones you gravitated towards. I get punk. and there are certain punk bands I enjoy, but it's definitely not my sound, what I would necessarily gravitate towards. I mean, even if you go into classic punk like Clash, okay, I'll listen to Clash, and I have Clash, and yeah, I mean, it's good, and I recognize it, but it's not my necessarily sound that I would gravitate towards. And out of the big four, the two that I gravitated towards was Metallica and Megadeth. And I think part of the gravitation towards that was coming towards it from AC/DC, because that was my intro to metal, really, was AC/DC. And coming in from that zone, where, if you think about it, probably maybe the two closest bands in that zone would have been Metallica and Megadeth. I mean, I don't know, that may be a stretch, but I mean, the other question I have is, like, at what point, what album introduced you to metal? For me, I mean, I'm taking AC/DC out of it, or thrash metal specifically. What album introduced you to it? For me, it was Injustice for All by Metallica. For Megadeth, I wasn't really introduced. Like, yeah, I had Courage and Conformity, and I had Persistence of Time from Anthrax, and Sound of White Noise, which were later Anthrax 90s stuff. But really, the band that brought me into that was Metallica. And I mean, I got into Slayer in later 90s by the time I hit college. So I mean, Slayer didn't jump out right to the front for me specifically. But I mean, what album brought you guys in, and did that affect kind of how you approached thrash metal?
So when Injustice for All came out, I was oblivious. You know, I'd seen album covers out there, but there was a person at the school I was going to at the time. He insisted on playing that, and he like brought his cassette tape in and popped it into a little radio before school started, and it wasn't what I was expecting when I heard softer tones. You know, the beginnings of One. He popped it out and popped in Ride the Lightning, and I heard a Fade to Black, and here I had a whole different expectation of what this, you know, scary album cover band was going to be. And I was like, oh, this is actually kind of soft. And then of course it gets hard, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you know. But it was those softer tones, the acoustics, the instrumental parts, that it said, okay, this is approachable. I just have to be ready for when it changes. And it kind of softened the effect of it, where I could actually dabble into it a little bit. And I say, okay, this one's safe to listen to now. I'll experiment with some more. Oh, that one's too much. I'm going to go back to the safety of the soft one again. And that was really my introduction into the thrash, into the big four of thrash, was Injustice for All coming out. So One plus Fade to Black off of Ride the Lightning, those two tracks, as soon as I could acclimate to those, I was okay. And I was curious from there on out.
See, the funny thing is, like, I remember going to my buddy Josh, who was my skater buddy when I was in Maine, and his dad was a guitar player. I don't know what else his dad did, but it clearly played guitar. And Josh played bass. And I remember going over there, and I want to say it was Kill 'Em All was playing. And I was like, what is that? And he mentioned it, and I didn't really connect it. And then my 8th grade girlfriend was one who got me a copy of Injustice for All. And I'm like, what is this? She's like, my brother said it was awesome. I'm like, okay. So yeah, that was, you know, you're talking about some dude going, hey, listen to this. And just that kind of getting thrash stuck in your head and for me, the song that hooked me, yeah, One was good, but Dyer's Eve was one that got me. just the heavy bass lines, the repeated drumming. As much as I give grief to Lars on the excessive use of watering down the bass lines in Injustice for All, that song, as far as like the drumming, is just incredible, in my opinion. But what about you, D?
Well, I had, weirdly enough, like metal came in my life like later than most. And I showed up in like a lot of like metal, like when it's kind of peaking up in like the early 90s, like Ozzy's No More Tears, or going to Pump's house, hearing that for the first time. And I think I heard the Black Album, and then he showed me Master of Puppets, in particular Orion, just like stuff like that. And then like I think either Rust in Peace, there was a poster, and I remember seeing the poster of Rust in Peace, and I always thought like, wow, I want to check that out, whatever that is. I'd like to check that out. That's a cool cover. So then like but just really it was like just like when I see bands like Metallica or Megadeth or Anthrax, I jump in on a certain band on a certain record, and then I would go back and listen to all their other stuff. I just have that way of doing it. So, but we're talking about Anthrax, and as far as like their impact on the industry, a lot of people don't leave out the fact that because they were the only band of the big four that kind of represented New York, and from them, because of their success, spawned the careers of Prong, Life of Agony, Typo Negative, that whole like Brooklyn, New York punk, metal, hardcore scene now, like all say that like, yeah, it was like Scott Ian and Anthrax were like very instrumental in getting us, you know, it's kind of like, you know, they're kind of, they are like New York, you know, like whenever they go play New York, it's like there's a reason why they kind of headline that show.
But that goes back to the ambassadorness of and one of the problems in
I think also isn't Charlie the drummer now playing for Pantera now?
He is for that tour, yes.
One of the things that I have to add as a caveat, and number one, I said corrosion or conformity. I meant Countdown to Extinction. I was
good.
But one's a band, the other one's an album. In relation to like music in general, I've never hidden my confusion about Rush. And so I know somebody who is a doctor of music. Doctor of music. That just sounds like a cool doctor. Cool title. You know, what does he do? Oh, he goes in and he operates on music. Oh, wow. Cool. Anyway. And I was listening to a thing, and Rush always pops up on those lists where it's like, oh, this song by Rush, blah, 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 blah. And like, there's music that I get, and there is music that I don't get, but I understand is good music. And then there's music where I'm like, I don't understand how this is considered music beyond, you know, somebody banging on a metal pipe somewhere in a sewer and then turning it into something. With that said, one of the realizations I came out of, and it was a relatively brief conversation, and it piled in with all the other commentary I've made on Rush. Even, I mean, you guys have different opinions on Rush than I do. That realistically, music is a personal selection. And any issues I have with Anthrax, I don't think they're necessarily a bad band. I think one of the things that has hurt them probably the most is if you look at Slayer, you look at Megadeth, and you look at Metallica, and even if you want to expand, you look at a band like Alice in Chains. What has hurt them? The fact that they have had controversy in relation to maintaining a single singer and a single sound to it, some bands weather it. Iron Maiden's been through what, 4, 5 different lead singers.
5.
Black Sabbath has been through what, 3, 4?
Yeah, they've had a few.
But when you talk about Black Sabbath, you're talking about, most people end up, the broad swath, most people end up talking about early Black Sabbath. People, when they talk about Anthrax, that when I generally hear about it, you're talking about that, not the first singer, the second dude, and maybe people who jumped on ship around Sound of White Noise. And I'm not going to lie, I'm somebody who jumped on ship around Sound of White Noise. I personally think that's.
I got something I want to piggyback off of you whenever you're done.
But no. I mean, if jump in.
I was just thinking, like, you were talking about, like, also about how they will remaster something for the 8,000th time. I understand your position as far as, like, hey, we've already got like 7 different damn remixes of this. I think we got it, But however, there are some cases in some band catalogs, I feel like, when I think of Thin Lizzy, or when I think of Megadeth Rust in Peace, or I think of, I just think those albums sounded like they would have been like a lot louder in the studio, because whenever you put on an album, say like Megadeth Rust in Peace to me, or White Zombies, Los Exorcisto, the one that had Black Sunshine, Thunder Kiss 65. Every time
I just have a greatest hits. I'm not sure which one that's off of.
Okay, but you listen to that White Zombie or that Megadeth record that I'm talking about, it's like, it just seems like it would have been like a lot louder, like when you're actually there. And I just feel like that, man, they probably got as far as production, because like whenever you hear Holy Wars, like to me, that should be like, that riff should just grab your attention, because I've seen the difference from the studio version versus a live recording. And the live recording is far superior in terms of energy and power versus the studio recording.
In Justice for All, I think is that album, any of the songs off there, hearing them live, not that I've seen them live, but I mean, like, closest time I'm ever getting to seeing Metallica live is a YouTube video. But seeing that live and played is phenomenally stronger than it sounds on the album. And there are some bands that honestly sound great live,
mm-hmm.
and their albums they're okay. I mean, the session recordings are okay. A band that pops to mind for that is OAR. Their early stuff sounds okay on the recordings, but honestly, hearing them live, and I've seen them live a couple times, and actually getting some of their live albums, hearing that live and hearing the songs done live, they're a band that is better in a live scenario than I think they are necessarily in a recording session. And so I think there is a component of thrash metal that honestly being in the show changes it. And that it's one of the problems that I see with Slayer specifically. For me, Slayer isn't necessarily about the lyrics. So like some bands, you're going and you're rocking along to what the words are. You're involved in what it is. I would say Megadeth and Metallica are the best as far as like lyric wise, being able to identify what the lyrics are and singing along with it. You may be thrashing your head back and forth, but you're also like involved in the lyrical component of it. Slayer, to me at least, it strikes me as hard to identify without grabbing the liner notes and going, okay, what the hell is he saying, to identify what the thing is. Anthrax falls kind of in between there. Some songs, holy crap, man, you can hear it really well, and then other ones you're like, what the hell is he saying? I have no clue. But I think going to a show of any 4 of them in their heyday would have been awesome. Like that would have been probably one of the best shows you could be, because it would be loud. It would be like filling you. You would feel the bass drum. You'd feel the bass guitar just rippling through your body. And the energy that would come from everybody mashing around, headbanging to whatever's coming out would be incredible. So
if you think about it, a lot of the structure of thrash metal, you just basically take a look at the music of Iron Maiden or Priest, how the guitars are structured, how they harmonize. Maiden has that groove, that bass groove to their music, and having a groove to thrash is definitely a plus in that genre. So then you have Motorhead. That's, you know, they are like that fast kind of a band. So you take all of that stuff and like when I'm like looking at some of these bands, like some of the albums that stick out, we were talking about Slayer. Me personally, I did like Raining Blood. It is a good album, but for me, the one that really kind of like personally hit home for me was South of Heaven. I love that album. And I thought Divine Intervention was good. And then I think the last one that I liked that they put out was that World Painted Blood, I think it was. And that's as far as like Slayer, you know. But yeah, Slayer's always been kind of like hit and miss for me. But I do like, I have like liked as far as like what their contribution has been, you know. I saw a video with them where they did the Rain and Blood tour, and they actually had like the sky raining blood down on them as they're playing. Looked really cool. So, yeah.
Well,
something I want to kind of kick in. You were talking about production values on the albums.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, the production values help define what metal had become. Very controversial for its time, Injustice for All, for the lack of bass, the very cold, tinny, sharp razor sound.
Did you hear this? Did you hear the story behind that?
I have heard the story.
All right, I'll tell you mine, and you let me know.
Well, I just want, and we can get to the story in just a moment. I want to mention that as controversial as Injustice for All was, it was actually a defining point for a hair metal band called Pantera to actually change their sound and record an album called Cowboys from Hell, which mimicked that sound. And all of a sudden, boom, there was another big band on the scene.
Yeah, they kind of got that tinge to the sound on that record.
Yeah, and just kind of razor sharp.
Yeah.
A bit of a flat sound, but some of that sound also could lend its way also to where industrial metal comes in.
Yeah.
If you think about it. So your Fear Factories, even maybe a little bit of 9 Inch Nails, where it was just a kind of a non-warm, a very cold sound.
Yeah.
Would that have been a marriage of? And this is where we need a doctor of music for this to know the actual history on that. But would that be a marriage of the techno, electronic merging with metal, not necessarily thrash metal? Because I don't necessarily think I would think early 9 Inch Nails, and I'm thinking Pretty Hate Machine specifically. Once you get to Broken, I think you're dealing with more of a Nirvana-esque intrusion to it, a grunge intrusion to it. But I think with Pretty Hate Machine, I think that would be more, in my opinion, would be more of a progression of the electronic into moving beyond like the pop electronic at the time. Because I mean, that was late. I think Pretty Hate Machine came out in '89. So if you think about like what pop electronic was at the time, I mean, that was, bubblegum pop almost. And so at the same time, you have the hair bands running around, and that definitely wasn't taking that kind of zone to it. Pretty Hate Machine, I don't really hear any of the thrash metal to it.
No.
I think Nine Inch Nails is an expansion, and then you get into like Machines of Love and Grace and some of those other techno industrial bands that later popped up in the 90s. I don't know. The grunge thing kind of messes with the timeline, because knowing, and we kind of experienced this with Soundgarden, like what was the sound before 1990? Where was the sound? And it actually, not just Soundgarden, Faith No More, because Faith No More progressed across that line. And when I'm part of the reason why early on I said, talking about the whole thing of 80s and 90s, because the sound continues a progression. And I think for Slayer, Anthrax, Megadeth, and Metallica, all four of them, there is the 80s sound was something. I'm going to call back to Metallica's Garage Inc. They all those early albums, every single one of them, all of them sounded like somebody recorded them in the garage. It didn't sound like it was high production value, and I think that was the core of early thrash, was that feeling that this was anybody's music, and be it Californians, be it New York, it didn't matter. This was something that somebody could make in a garage and actually put it out, much like early rap, that dudes were recording it on tapes and just handing it out on street corners. They were going around with a quick DJ setup, and they were doing things and just playing in small areas just to get attention. And that's in many ways busking, if that's the right term for it. This was metal busking. But then you get into the 90s, and it's Sound of White Noise. I come back to that for Anthrax. Sound of White Noise is that dividing line I see between what was and what became. Much like the Black Album for Metallica, much like Euthanasia for Megadeth. Slayer, I don't know enough on Slayer, but I don't know what that dividing line album was for them for me to see this is when they progressed their sound.
Divine Intervention.
Which one?
Divine Intervention. That's where they kind of took it to another, because I think Dave Lombardo left after Seasons of the Abyss, and they got the new drummer in. And the next album after it was Divine Intervention.
Does that show, is that around the same time of it, like 93, 94?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, Sound of White Noise was
92.
Euthanasia was 93, I think.
Well.
The Black Album was 91 or 92.
Wasn't Euthanasia 94?
Euthanasia, yes. Euthanasia was 94.
I thought it was 93. I thought it came out.
No, it came out, actually, Ryan, when you and I were working at a grocery store.
Early 90s.
If only I had a thing. Actually, we are all wrong. Wrong.
Euthanasia.
Wrongo, 1995.
Oh, my God.
Must have been early 95 then.
It must have been. I'm going to check another independent source on that, because that does not. I remember being in high school for that.
So while you're doing that, something I want to bring up about how the sound changed. Well, if you think about it, much like any new thing out there, yes, you're going to have your raw albums first, but then it's when you get a producer. For instance, Bob Rock. Love him or hate him, Bob Rock produced Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet, elevated them to a whole new level. Did some other albums, did Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood, elevated them. After that, took on Metallica for the Black Album, elevated them. On the flip side, you have Dave Jordan. He was the one that produced Sound of White Noise for Anthrax. He was working with the Red Hot Chili Peppers before elevating them, going back to some pop music. So it's almost like you get the big name producer after you've started to establish yourself some, and then that's what gets you over the curb.
So October of 2024, or 1994.
Euthanasia.
Yeah, for euthanasia.
So
Black Album was August of